back to Call Time with Katie Birnbaum. I'm so glad that we had the opportunity we had last week to discuss some of the conversations that have been going on in the theater industry currently. I've always wanted, in addition to the show being a celebration of this great art form we love, to also feel current and relevant to the conversations that people in the industry are having. So the response has been really great, and thank you for that. This next guest that we have this week is just as interesting and relevant and current. The very impressive director and theater maker, Abigail Jean-Baptiste. Here you are.
Here I am.
Thank you for
Hi.
being here.
Thanks for having me. It's so nice to see your face.
I'm going to call you Abby. Is that okay? Because I know you
Yes,
will. Okay, cool.
please.
Um, let's do, and interestingly, on this new iteration of my show, you are the first classmate of mine to be on. So there you go, special.
Okay.
Um, and we did a little bit of this before I started recording, but how are you feeling today? Like, what's your pandemic vibe check as a theater maker today?
Yeah. Oh, I definitely prefer vibe check to like, how are you? Because
Yes.
that's been just the dreaded question this whole
So
year.
though the tricky thing is, when I was like interviewing someone a bit older, I texted some people and I was like, do you think this person will understand what a vibe check is? And they were like, no.
No.
So it's nice to have you who understands the significance of the vibe check.
Yes. Vibes are okay today. It's sunny. Got some fresh air this morning. So feeling very like centered in ways that I haven't been before today. So, taking it day by day still and slow and steady.
So before we get into our conversation, I'm going to introduce you to our viewers for people who may be unfamiliar with your work, though they should be because it's super impressive. Abby is, like me, a native New Yorker and a graduate of Princeton University. Immediately after graduating, she won a prestigious Lilly Award for the New York Women's Foundation Directing Apprenticeship. She went on to assistant direct for the likes of John Doyle, Sahim Ali, Diane Paulus, and Sam Gold, including for the Broadway productions of King Lear and Jagged Little Pill. On her own, she's directed Big Date by Carrie Glitter at the New Ohio Theater and Oleo Live for Audible Theater at Minetta Lane. She's a member of Roundabout Theater Company's Directors Group, an associate board member for Classic Stage Company, and coordinates a BIPOC theater makers group at Princeton. So that is a ton of stuff in the only few years since you've graduated, which I always like is so cool for me, because I think in college, like, we think of the ages of people in colleges
Yeah.
become so important. So you're like, oh, this person is younger than me, and you've done so much. Your resume is so impressive. So my first question is like, does it feel that way to you, especially in this past year of like unemployment and the
Yeah.
pandemic for all of us?
Yeah. I think about that a lot because like the people who I look up to, I'm always like, wait, do you ever reflect on the fact that you're so amazing and
Right.
you've done so much? And I feel like when you're in it, you don't see it that way at all because you're always looking ahead. And you're always kind of looking to the next thing in ways that don't leave a lot of space for like reflecting and celebrating what you've done thus far. And so I kind of feel that way where like I don't really reflect on what's happened. Like I'm always worried about what I'm doing next and what I'm doing now. So I kind of forget about the things that I've done. And I'm also just always trying to stay busy and seeing the things I'm staying busy with as like things that I've done or accomplished or like can celebrate isn't really how I've been processing it. So this year having a lot less going on and actually having time to be like, okay, what have I done? Like, what do I want to do next? And really like breathing through that space has given me a little bit more time to be like, okay, like I did do theater things, like it's happened, because it feels really surreal and it's hard to like reconnect with yourself like after the fact. There's usually not that space to do that. So this time of not having work, I've actually had to like look back at what I've done and make space for that.
We're in such a competitive business, so
Yeah.
it's always like, what's next? What are we doing? Especially I remember when I first worked on the other side of the table rather than performing, I was fascinated by the fact that like we leave after the show opens, and therefore we're already thinking about the next project,
Yep.
even when we're in like previews
Yep.
for the current one. And I think it's been both cool, as you say, to have time off to like leave space for these things and have gratitude, as you say, but also scary and weird to not know what's next.
Yeah.
But I think something that served you in really good stead when I was thinking about your career, professional career thus far, and doing research about it is that you have this strong perspective about your work and the type of work you want to make. And I think like a lot of people graduate from college, even like conservatories, and say basically like, I want to make good theater. And I sort of want to say to them, like, about what? Why? Like, what do you want to say? And on your website, you say that the guiding principle of your theatrical practice is making theater for, with, and about Black, Indigenous, people of color, queer folks, and people with disabilities. So can you expand a bit on that and also talk about how you came to that perspective, that take on theater?
Yeah. I mean, I think that this idea of good work is something that I grapple with a lot. I think that it's that wanting to complicate that is kind of why I wanted to go to a liberal arts school and not a performance based undergrad. Because I kind of didn't know what that meant. Like, what does it mean to make good work, and like who's under whose qualifications, and like whose opinions, I think is super baked into the hierarchies of viewership and gaze, and like who's seeing theater and critiquing theater and talking about theater. So I think going to a liberal arts school really made me like always be critically thinking about the work that I was involved in.
Were you an English major?
I was an English major. I mean, Katie, we have so much in common. I got you on the triangle quiz. Like, we're, kindred spirits.
The basis of which was mostly like, do you like Jane Austen and do you like chocolate, as I recall. But anyway, yes, more than that we have in common. But yes, that's great. So
Yeah.
keep going. Sorry.
No. So I think a lot of like what was being discussed in English classes in terms of like close readings and in terms of thinking, about the context of the text. And also, I think very formative to my vision of art making has a lot to do with the classes I was taking in the African American Studies department, and reading a lot of work that I hadn't been exposed to in high school, and a lot of essays that were kind of critiquing the ideas of normate, or the assumptions that we make about what we're seeing and engaging with. And so a lot of my ideas of good theater as a young person was, based in golden age musicals, was based on like a lot of predominantly white stories that I was seeing on Broadway, because I grew up in New York. And so that was a lot of the art I was consuming. And when I was engaging in these classes that were kind of disrupting ideas of mainstream art, I started, investigating what I wanted to say with my work a little bit deeper than like, I want to make something that people will clap at and like, praise after.
Right.
And so I was trying to like integrate what I was learning in class with the art I was making. And a lot of that had to do with like how can I tell stories that are not being given the worth or space or time that they deserve, and give voice to people who are underrepresented and underknown by the mainstream. And I think like the freedom that there was at school to really be be at the helm of choosing the work that we were making, and exploring things beyond just a performance in the educational setting really helped me figure that out, because a lot of the early stuff I was making was very much not in line with how I see my art making now. Like I was just picking like musicals that I thought people would show up to and that like I was perceiving as good, which was a lot of work by white men, and a lot of work that starred white male characters. Um, and it was so at odds with what I believe theater can do beyond that, and also like it wasn't representing myself at
Right.
all. So as I was figuring out how to get more in line with what I wanted to do as a director and as a theater maker, I had a lot to unlearn. And so that's why I try to be very like bold in talking about in vocalizing what my practice is, because I think I also have to say it for myself
Mm,
to disrupt the own patterns of my brain that are like, oh, good means something that a white man has a hand in,
right.
you know.
Yeah, I think I feel very grateful too for the theater education we got at Princeton, even though it was in some cases weird because we were making the work, as you say. And of course, a lot of us are going to look back on, of course, on the things that we made when we were 18 years old and say, like, yikes. But but that's part of the learning curve. And as you say, we were at the helm and we got to wear so many different hats.
Yeah,
And I think it's interesting. I feel like the term theater maker gets thrown around a lot in the last like 5 years.
for
But
sure.
I also feel like people beyond the industry don't really understand what it means. So, what does it mean to you in general, and what does it mean to you as when you use it to identify yourself and what you make?
So I feel like the first time I encountered that term was from someone who was an advisor to me at Princeton, a director named Sharif Ali. And she had been using that term since she first got to America. She's from South Africa, because a lot of her exposure to theater in South Africa was about like learning all of the roles and,
Mm,
knowing about lighting, knowing about stage management, knowing how to make theater in all of the capacities, um, not pigeonhole yourself into one role and like has a singular vision of um, how to make a piece of art. And so she kind of introduced me to this phrase, and I just saw it as something that pushes against the idea that you can only do one thing, and also that when you're doing that one thing, you don't have to know anything else about what anyone else is doing.
right.
um and I think it also helps, you know counter hierarchies with theater, because it is such a collaborative art, and I think that's one of the reasons a lot of people love it so much. But then in the professional world, there is a lot of divides between who's doing what.
Mhm.
When I prefer to approach it in this more holistic sense that, we're making this thing as a collective, and there can be like cross departmental collaboration, that doesn't have to be specific to your title. And so for me, it it kind of opens up the possibilities of the art making, because I don't want to say that I'll never write, or I'll never try to design, or I'll never try to produce. Like, I want to kind of serve the making of theater in whatever capacities kind of arise, even if the role of directing is the role that I have been in predominantly. I'm excited about theater as a whole, and want to engage with it beyond that singular role. Does that make sense?
Totally. Absolutely. I'm very drawn to that. I think you're totally right about the spirit of collaboration. And it is sort of silly, especially when you work in sort of mainstream, especially musical theater contexts. It's very like, well, over here at this tech table, this is what we are doing, and this is not your purview.
Yep.
And I think you're right that sometimes that doesn't serve the work. But it's interesting too, because I think, like most people who, well, I mean, there are some counterexamples, but I've had a number of like directors and choreographers on the show, and I myself do some directing, but all of us, it seems, come originally from performing.
Yeah.
And I'm curious about, first of all, I'm curious about the moment when you were young, maybe, when you were like, oh, this is what I want to do. Was it performing, or was it seeing something? And then I also want to know about that transition from performance to directing for you.
Yeah. It feels so cliched now that my story came from acting, because I feel like that's now just very universally like the gateway drug into all entertainment roles. But it's so magical when you're young to like be another role and play pretend and get on a stage. And so I think it's so attractive to so many people. And so I was always, in the school play and did little scenes in class or whatever. I remember one time we were doing like in elementary school, we were doing a skit. And to be fair, we had to pick numbers, and the numbers would like choose our roles. And I picked the number 3, and that got me the lead role in this skit. And from then on, my favorite number has been 3. And that was that like memory of really wanting to be heavily featured in this random skit really stays with me. And like, reminds me that it was something I loved from a really young age, even if I wasn't articulating it.
Right. I wonder if you had gotten a different number and had a smaller role, if you'd be where you are today.
I mean, probably not. It was it's crucial. But I was honestly really resistant to naming theater or performance as something I wanted to do. I think that I didn't really understand what it meant to have a career in it. It felt very mystical and improbable. So even though it was kind of the only thing I knew how to do, and also the thing I found the most joy in, it was also really scary and really intimidating. So I don't think it didn't really click for me until a little bit later, even though I'd been doing so much of it. Because I was like, oh, this is just something that I do for fun, or think about, or talk about, or engage with, like in the safety of a school setting. And so because I did it so much, I definitely wanted to engage with theater in some capacity at undergrad, and got just really into the idea of exploring beyond performance. I think that I became, in the context of a lot of people being really good at performing, I realized how lazy I was about acting, that like I didn't want to spend time memorizing lines or like thinking about intentions of my character. Like I wanted to sit in the audience during tech and look at it and like and be in conversations about it, not be on stage.
Mm.
And so finding little ways to explore directing became important to me to keep engaging with the thing I loved so much, but being a part of the storytelling in a different way. Um, but I still was so resistant to like, I'm gonna do this after
Right.
graduating. And I feel like it didn't, like I have so many small memories of like being in a rehearsal um or a tech process, and I think I just like found something recently in an old diary that was like, I don't know what I would do in my life without theater. Like I knew that it was so essential to my life and my being, but I just didn't know what that meant or like what that would result in, um, for a really long time. And so it wasn't really until I like the pressure of graduating that I
Mm.
was like, I don't, nothing else makes sense. I
Mm.
guess theater is the thing that I should be doing. Like I was just so kind of apprehensive to be decisive about it or like really center myself in um in that role of like doing it professionally, because I don't know, I made up this kind of myth of it in my head as something I couldn't do. Um, and so it was only with like, I'm leaving school, I have to do something, that I was like reaffirmed my passion for it. And like, there's really nothing else that I could be doing and be happy or be doing and use my knowledge in the way that made sense, and my training at school that made sense, because everything had been through the lens of performance or theater in some way. The force of the decision was what kind of made the decision in the end. I needed that pressure um to commit.
Yeah. I mean, it's a scary choice and a scary business for so many reasons. It's so interesting to me what you say about like realizing you wanted to be in the audience during a tech, like looking at the whole thing. As I started to do some directing of my own in addition to performance, it's become very clear to me like who is meant to be like just a performer and who is meant to do other things. Because there is a type of person that only wants to like inhabit their character and think about that and like be there. And then there are
And
types
I
of
could
people
never do that.
that like I have no desire and I've never had any desire to go to like drama school and like do a mime class. Like that sounds horrible to me. But some people are like, I need to do a mime class in order to like be able to commit to these characters. And I completely respect that and think that the training makes sense and is great, but not something I've ever wanted to do. But I think it's in concert with, I'm curious for your thoughts on this, because one of the reasons I started directing and then like kept directing was because, and I think without even realizing it, I felt, especially in like big musicals contexts, I felt sort of like a cog in a machine, sort of powerless as a woman. And I'm sure that that's doubly true as a woman of color.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if that sort of desire for agency or desire for power sounds weird, but desire for agency or desire for independence, is it all what made that jump click for you?
Yeah, I think that it was both things. It was that like I knew that wasn't I couldn't commit to performance and acting in the way that I w- thought was necessary to
Right,
like
the way you
be good
need to.
at it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and like knew that other people were really um strong in it in ways that like I wasn't. And so realized that that wasn't what I was really excited about. Like that, in seeing other people be so excited about the practice and process of acting, I saw that it wasn't what was really stimulating for me.
Right.
And then I do think that agency was a part of it, especially in like in figuring out what my voice was as an artist. Like, yes, I definitely felt under visible, like as a Black woman performing in predominantly white spaces. But then it's so interesting because I didn't then go make theater about Black people or theater really about women in response to it. Like I kind of then was reproducing the work that I was inside of. And it took time to kind of like purge that out of my system to get to the stuff that was actually like driving me creatively. So I definitely feel now that what I'm most excited about as a director is telling the stories I didn't feel like other people were telling when I was acting, but that wasn't the initial kind of spark, which is
Right.
so then I kind of question what directing was doing for me at that time that acting wasn't, because it wasn't a different kind of story. But I think it was like collaboration looked a little bit different in terms of like the pre-production and, you know, conversations with designers, conversations with choreographers, you know, to see like really getting access to how other people were storytelling, like with their own specialties that I didn't have access to as a performer, that I was so excited about. Like, oh, how did you decide those costumes for that? Like, how did you decide those set decisions? How are we going to tell that story through dance? And that was kind of the masterclass from all those other collaborators, was things I knew nothing about when I was performing, because you have to really focus on your character to get the performance out of yourself that is often needed. Whereas as a director, I had space and it made my directing better to know everything that was going on, to know the whole picture. And that's what was more inspiring to me creatively than digging into a character and circumstances specifically and putting my body into it. I think also there definitely was a difficulty I had with vulnerability in these predominantly white spaces of of putting my body as a Black woman in like to be very seen, or to like be very to have my physical body be vulnerable in the process of acting, whereas directing allowed me to be a bit more behind the scenes in a way that I was physically comfortable with. And then now I think um the agency of storytelling has a lot to do with like why I continue to be really excited about directing, and continue to be very comfortable in this role.
Yeah, it's so interesting what you say about you know, having difficulty being vulnerable, because I imagine it's an ask you make now, especially when you're making these stories about underrepresented and visible groups. You're now asking them to be vulnerable in these spaces, but how much better that you are at the helm so that they can be allowed to be vulnerable. But of course, it's
I
this weird.
hope so.
Well, we'll get some testimonials later. But of course, like, theater audiences are still predominantly white, even if the creative team and most of the cast are BIPOC, there is still sort of this weird aspect of viewership that
Yeah.
must be difficult. You, like most young directors, when you start out, have done assistant directing in addition to your own work. And I've done some of that too. It may be hard to answer this, but do you prefer directing on your own versus assistant directing?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that this year because I definitely got into the kind of assistant directing cogwheel of things and have been so humbled by the opportunities I've had to work with people who are just so brilliant and like have such a good sense of the craft of theater directing. It really feels like I got this kind of grad school training.
You basically went to grad school.
Right. Um, and I'm so thankful for that, and like continuously find myself learning really crucial things about art making and also myself as a director by assistant directing, and I really enjoy it, and think it's such a valuable mode of training and mode of collaboration. But I think in this last year I've realized how important it is to do both, because I do have something to say as a director that is not uh, possible if I'm only taking on the role of assisting. And so making space for that has been kind of at the forefront of my priorities as theater starting to open up. I'm still taking assisting jobs because especially when it's like a play that I would never direct that I would never want to direct myself, or like with a theater I've never worked with before, or with a director I really love, because if there's something to learn, or if I know that I'm going to be collaborating in new ways, I always think that assisting is really valuable. So just being really intentional about the work that I choose to do, and the people that I'm collaborating with, has been what I'm trying to navigate. And it's hard because I think as a, emerging director, whatever that means, the work that I would be directing myself is not necessarily the work that I want to be directing because of financial limitations, because of the scarcity mindset of there only being a certain number of shows that need a director. And so it is kind of a give and take of like, okay, what can I do? What work can I help myself that is not going to be kind of just for the title of directing, and not actually like the work that I want to be doing? And if I can be assisting on something that is the work that like I really have a passion behind and like heart behind, then I rather do that. So it's just like being very intentional about what projects and what and everything's so short, right? And like you said, like we don't, after it opens, there's kind of, you move on to the next thing. And so also I'm trying not to put pressure on every single, like, even though I'm being intentional, I'm trying not to put pressure on every single project being like, this will define my career.
Right.
But like, what kind of collage of things can I put together to make the career I want?
It's such a delicate balance that I think about a lot too, because sometimes I'll like look up shows that I really admired, and I'll be like, I wonder who assisted on that
Yes, yes,
project,
yes, yes.
and if they had a career after that. And for some people, it's like, okay, they were a career assistant director. And I think that's great.
Yeah.
That requires like a specific skill set.
Yes, totally.
But that transition from, because everyone has to start out assisting, and as you said, there's so much to learn, but that transition, like when is the moment? And I think your approach is right, which is that you can't approach every project being like, is this the moment? Is this the moment? Is this the moment? It'll just come. I
Right. Yeah. And I think it's like, I had first kind of imagined it in stages in a very like undergrad mindset of like, okay, first you do
you're a
this,
freshman.
right? And then you like graduate to sophomore year.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where when it's so much messier than that. Like, I'm not now a director when I stop assistant directing. Like, I you can still be assistant directing and be directing, like doing all of it. And um it doesn't define you one way or another. There's not really like a drop off of different points in your career, you know.
Yeah. I find that when I assistant direct, it's a great opportunity because you get to sort of see these different styles of these great famous directors and kind of take them on to some extent in your own style. And I'm curious if you feel there are particular styles or directors you've worked with whose approach to the work you've tried to emulate or that you've incorporated into your own practice.
Well, I loved how you were saying earlier how like being an actor and realizing the vulnerability needed kind of makes you well equipped as a director to be sensitive to that, because I think that that's then where my priorities lie in my own process of making it a really safe and joyous space where people feel like they can um, be vulnerable and not feel scared about that, or not feel judged, or not feel shame around it. And so, I mean, all of the directors I've worked with have done this in different ways, but the way that I am always very like excited about and talk about a lot is Liliana Blaine Cruz, because she just brings so much joy to the room and energy and positivity and happiness, even if a play is about something really difficult and upsetting and challenging, that makes you want to play and makes you want to push yourself. Like, even me, who's obviously not acting, but like I feel that I can be vulnerable even in my role as assistant director, because there's so much space for messiness and joy and yelling and jumping and kicking. And I think that a lot of the ways that I found joy in theater making in school and as a child had a lot to do with that kind of silliness.
Yeah.
And so that's the rituals of silliness are something I really try to like cultivate in my own work, because they're so joyous when I'm assisting Liliana.
That's great. There's nothing worse than a rehearsal room that feels like a dirge, because at the end of the day, like, we're playing. Like, guys, come
Yeah.
on. Even if it's Hamlet. Um, do you have a favorite project that you've worked on, either assisting or of your own?
This isn't a finite favorite, but I just like have a lot of love for Olio Live, because it was really at the nexus of like my English major, African American studies, and theater brain, because Tamba wrote these like really beautiful poems about various kind of, oh my gosh, like, what is that? Not like, okay, gypsy, what is that, like, circuit?
Vaudeville.
Thank you. A bunch of African American kind of vaudevillian performers who most people don't know about and are not really given voice, and he gave voice to all of these really incredible performers via poetry. And theatricalizing the poems was really exciting on so many levels, but I think that it was a realization of or an actualization of a lot of the work that I had been doing in undergrad in the classroom, in a way that was like, oh, there's space for this kind of like nerdy literature theater stuff, and it's there's a theater to these poems on the page, in ways that like I fantasized as I was talking about it in a seminar, but like to actually do it was so beautiful.
I love that answer. It's so fun and frankly rare when those of us who, I mean, this sounds conceited, but maybe it's not, but those of us who have studied very academically English or African American studies or history or what have you, when that does meet theater.
Yeah.
And what you were saying about Olio Live reminds me of something I saw on your website, that you're working on this etching of the musical White Christmas and interlacing it with the experiences of Black train porters at the time. And I saw that and I was like, oh my God, like I zeroed in, because it's, as sort of like a golden age musical theater person, it just, it's such a smart, to me, it seems like such a smart way of like dusting off a musty old classic and like repurposing it and recontextualizing how we think of it. So I'm curious about like that process and the origin of that.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for saying that. I can't, I don't remember the exact moment that the idea germinated from, but I guess now a year ago, I was just reflecting on my love of this movie, White Christmas,
So
that I grew up with. It's just so brilliant in so many ways. And I watch every year and I just know every line and love every second of it. And in the past couple viewings, realized that there was a Black person in it who like is in the dining car when they're all taking the train to Vermont. And the fact that I hadn't realized that after so, like, it took me so many watches to see this unnamed dining car porter just really interests me. And I'm also kind of tangentially obsessed with trains in their own right. Like
I love
it's my
that.
favorite. It's my favorite mode of travel, and I just find them so fascinating and soothing, and like
They're the best, but that's so East Coast of us. I also love trains. No one not on the East Coast feels that way, but yeah.
I guess that's very true. It's a very coastal thing to love. But it just kind of, there was a bunch of things just surfacing for me with that discovery. And in trying to rectify my my love for golden age musicals, and also like it is genuinely the basis of my sense of theatricality, so trying to align that with my directorial thesis or what have you, like i I just wanted to kind of crack it open and figure out what's in that musical for me, and like what how to bring voices to it that like are there and just haven't been like brought to the surface.
I'm obsessed with it. I can't wait to see it in all its various forms. It's so
Thank you.
exciting. And it makes me think, I definitely sometimes feel a lot of guilt for being like someone who loves all these classic golden age musicals. And I was talking to one of my friends the other day, and he was like, it's how people are saying, like, no one needs to do Shakespeare for the next like 20 years. Like, we don't need that. We've done it. We don't need that. And I was like, the, I was very shocked by it and like upset. And then I had to catch myself and be like, let's investigate this. Like, why is this so upsetting to me? And I'm curious for your perspective as someone who strives to make work that includes people that have usually not been included. Is your attitude like, we can keep these old classics, the golden age musicals, the Shakespeare, but do them in new ways? Or is it like, no, we need to be focusing on new work solely?
Yeah, I mean, I love new work, and I think that it definitely I think it's important to give space to it, to new writers, to new stories. And I think it's also really important to acknowledge all of the history of theater and the legacy of theater that's like, it's not going to go away if we don't do it for 20 years. Like, it's still there.
True.
It's still affecting the ways that we're imagining theater, the ways that we're engaging with theater. So I also am really obsessed with theater that acknowledges that past and engages with that past in ways that make us or encourage us to look at it in new ways, as opposed to just ignoring that exclusionary canon of classics, to challenge it and to reframe it and to disrupt it in some way, I think is a more active way of acknowledging how honestly oppressive it's been and continues to be. And so I'm excited about like new work or new ways of doing work that is in conversation with Shakespeare, is in conversation with, all of these things that we're kind of trying to forget, in order to kind of resolve our guilt. I think it's actually better to, like you said, take a second and investigate the guilt and investigate the why. I think that there needs to be space for both. And I think that there's also some really incredible work being done archivally that's like reinvestigating work, reinvestigating the canon and trying to find new ways to also like engage with work that is however many years old but wasn't read or performed or given its due because it wasn't written by the people we associate a playwright or a screenwriter or a composer to look like or be. And it's really exciting to me to engage in that archival work and that research work because it all informs the new work. Like if we're just creating new work on the bed of one history, then the new work isn't going to necessarily disrupt that just because it's new.
All the dramaturgs will be so happy by what you said because they can like really go in the archives and go ham, because I think you're exactly right. There just has to be work that we haven't discovered. Or even like when you're talking about White Christmas, I'm sure if people were to go back through documents and oral histories and things, there were people behind the scenes of, Oklahoma and Guys and Dolls that we don't think about when we think about Rodgers and Hammerstein, and Frank Lesser, who were underrepresented but were like doing something. And let's think about what they were doing, what were their contributions. I think that's really cool. But in that question, we've been talking a lot about like, it's even funny to me always that we like mention Shakespeare and Golden Age musicals in sort of the same breath, even though they're so different. And something I also really admire about your work is that you do seem to do in equal parts plays and musicals, which I think is really rare. And I'm curious, is there a mode of storytelling that you gravitate towards more?
I just love both so much and feel like in the same sort of theater makery mindset that they're all valid modes of storytelling and have their own pros and cons, and certain stories like are craving to be a musical and certain stories are craving to be dialogue heavy plays, and that engaging with both is the way that I is my kind of happy place, my little corner niche.
That's so good because it's so rare. It really is. Like, but I think you're right that it's in the same spirit of the like theater maker thing. Like, it's great that you're not limiting yourself to be like, no, I only do this specific type of musical. No, I only do these straight plays. I think it's also, we should retire the term straight play, but
let's do it right now.
I noticed too on your website, which is a great resource.
My brother My younger brother coded it.
Wow. I love that.
Yeah.
Good job. What's his name?
Noah.
Good job, Noah. Props to Noah. Um, I love that at the end of it, you have a list of things that are inspiring you at the moment, which included, in addition to plays and musicals, like pop culture things, which I really love because I also keep a running list of those. So my question first is, why do you think it's important for theater makers to engage with pop culture and other art beyond theater?
Ooh, I think it makes theater more interesting and also more like of the world. um I don't know, like because I as an individual am engaging with visual art and reality TV and sports and all these other modes of media as a human being, I know it's going to influence the work. And I think um the the kind of ways that we divide like high art and low art are not necessarily helpful to making human art. And so I think that the more that I can kind of pull from all these different places will hopefully make my work more universal, and more fun.
Are there things that are inspiring you at the moment, like this week?
Oh, this week. Well, I always have some sort of sport influence in my mind. So baseball is like really kind of at the forefront of my mind right now. I think it's such a theatrical sport for some reason. There's just so much, because it's so slow. You really are like, the facial expressions are just so key. The way that their people's like bodies are touching and interacting, like the slapping of the butts and the like all the hand signals, like it's fascinating to me. It's like a dance and like a choreography to it that I love. And I am also recently obsessed with this visual artist, Howardina Pindell, whose exhibit I went to at the Shed. And she has this really interesting series where she took photos of it, or actually I think on a TV screen, she kind of like annotated um what was going on with arrows and numbers and stuff, and then took a photo of it. And there's this one that she has from a baseball game. And so I'm really interested in like in the ways that this Black woman was engaging with baseball when it was like first being televised, and then like now me engaging with baseball, and like what that this like televised event and then this woman's visual art means in the context of my theater making. I don't know, but I just like think it's all really interesting.
Wow, I cannot wait for your reimagined production of Damn Yankees now, knowing this information. It's going to be amazing. Also, one of those weird golden age shows that I'm like, there's a lot, someone could really do some stuff with
Yeah.
that. My last question I always end on a segment called the Thank You Five segment, which is 5 rapid fire questions. But before
I almost texted you thank you 5 minutes before our time.
I feel like there are directors who sort of have a really strong vision even when they go in the room on the first day and sort of know what they have to do. And then there are directors that you feel like it's sort of coming to them and we're all working together and it's coming during. And obviously theater is, we're all so strapped for cash every single production, so it has to be so fast. So sometimes directors, you have to know what choices you're going to make. But I'm like, do you think of yourself as one of those styles, or is there one that you prefer?
I think that it's a mix of both. Like I think that I try to do as much prep as possible and then just like let it go out the window once I actually am with everyone. I love what John Doyle does with his kind of approach to a performance, which is that, it's the audience kind of sitting in at that stage of the process, as opposed to it being an end point. And so that's kind of something that I try to remind myself a lot, as like you know, it's ephemeral, it's not fixed, it's going to be different every night anyway. So why try, like, why obsess over getting it to this like stagnant place? I'm doing this really random senior cabaret with the Princeton Music Theater and Theater Certificate students over Zoom. And I am really practicing that, like, go, like, just like let it be what it is. Everyone just like come as you are, and let's just have a good theatrical Zoom time together, as opposed to like, let's rehearse this a bunch of times and get it to that certain place. And because I think there's a lot of, you know, we're getting a lot of final product from TV and movie. Like, I think there's something really exciting about theater offering that more in process art form.
Yeah, there's nothing more exciting to a live audience than when an actor goes up on a line or something goes wrong.
Right.
Nothing. I love it. It's the best. So we'll do our Thank You Five segment. I know you said you didn't like favorites. There's only one question about favorites, and it's the first one. So we'll get that out of the way. I guess I already asked you this to some extent, but favorite play or musical you've worked on in any capacity. It could be you performed when you were young in it, or it could be like you directed it.
Oh, ooh, that's such a mean question. Okay, I'm gonna say Girls by Brandon Jacob Jenkins, that I did my senior year at
Great
Princeton.
answer. You've had the opportunity to work on Broadway, which is amazing. Best Broadway opening night story.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I'll have to tell you the real answers offline, but the
We have a lot of tea to get to offline.
but the public facing answer will have to be oh, at the Jagged Little Pill opening, a professor from, and you know, director in her own right, Elena Eros, was at the opening, and we had this just like beautiful like Princeton now at this opening together moment that was just like really wholesome and lovely.
That sounds lovely. It is really such a small community, so
Yeah.
you get to see everyone at some point.
Yeah.
Is there a piece of theater that you're dying to direct someday?
Oh, I'm so bad at this question because, and I think it's the same way that like I like to kind of keep things open, is like I I like to stumble upon something and don't haven't like predetermined that, but I guess it would be very fun to direct a production of, I don't have an answer actually.
That's totally fine. Some people have not answered. This is sort of similar. Do you think there's a topic or like setting that hasn't yet been mined for theater that you feel like is rich for it? It could be baseball.
Oh, I think that like we're slowly getting there, but we still haven't cracked like reality TV.
Mm.
What the kind of theatricalization, what theater's version of that is.
Yeah, it's a really good question as a reality TV watcher myself. And then lastly, do you have any advice for younger, perhaps aspiring Black femme theater makers?
Oof. Oh my gosh. Reach out to people. People are like, don't stop yourself from just like bothering people. They love young people, and it's your superpower to be like, hi, I'm a young artist, talk to me. They'll always say yes, or they won't answer, and that's fine.
Yes. I totally agree. I mean, I would give that advice to anyone trying to enter the theater. It's people have like anxiety about it, but you really shouldn't. Everyone just shoot your shot and ask. They're hungry for it.
Yeah.
Well, do you feel like there's anything that I've missed? Anything you want to discuss?
I think we did it. I think
we did the damn thing.
Oh.
Besides our offline secret talks.
Exactly.
This was so great. I love talking with you just as a friend, but I feel like with friends, it's rare that you have sort of a cerebral discussion about like process and product. So this was so fun and refreshing for me to sort of check in and see where you are. And I'm so excited about what's next, and I can't wait to see it all. So thank you so much.
Same back to you.
Tune in next week. We will have more incredible guests coming up, and then in a couple weeks, another special episode focused on a particular show. Thank you for watching Call Time with Katie Birnbaum. Have a great week.